On a Monday in June, Google lost $250 billion in market value. In a single day. Not because of a bad earnings report. Not because of a government investigation. Because two people, over the course of 2 days, each posted a message saying they were leaving for somewhere else. Who were these two people? One is Noam Chazir, the AI researcher Google paid $2.7 billion to bring back. The other is John Jumper, the 2024 Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, who had spent nearly 9 years at the company. 2 days. 2 people. $250 billion. But here's the part that should genuinely stop you in your tracks. Google isn't just a well-funded tech company. It's the company that invented the foundation that every AI system running today is built on. ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, every AI you've used or heard of traces its DNA back to a single paper written by Google researchers in 2017. It was called Attention Is All You Need. That paper is the bedrock of modern AI. Of the 8 people who wrote it, nearly all of them have left Google. 9 years later. So the real question isn't what went wrong with Google's AI. The real question is, how does a company that has everything money, talent, infrastructure, data systematically fail to hold on to the very people who built it? Sit with that question for a moment, because it's stranger than it first appears. Imagine a restaurant where the head chef invents a dish that becomes the most popular flavor in the world. Then that chef leaves and goes to work next door. That happens once, you chalk it up to personality, circumstances, whatever. But if the sous chef leaves, then the pastry chef, then the executive chef, one after another, all heading to competitors on the same block, that's not about any one individual anymore. Something is wrong with the restaurant itself. That's exactly the situation Google is in. In 2017, Google researchers published the Transformer Architecture, the fundamental structure underlying all modern AI. Think of it as the blueprint every AI brain is based on. According to 4-Week MBA, of the 8 co-authors on that paper, nearly all have since left Google, with 6 going to direct competitors or founding their own companies. And here's what makes this genuinely strange: it's not like Google was short on resources to keep them. Google has the world's most powerful AI computing infrastructure, the largest datasets, the most engineers, and capital expenditure that runs into the hundreds of billions. According to Sundar Pichai's public statements at Google I/O 2026, the company's projected capex for this year is between $180 and $190 billion, 6 times what it was in 2022. They have everything. And they still can't hold on to these people. Most people's first instinct when they hear this is, they just weren't paying enough. But if that's where you land, there's nothing interesting left to analyze, because Google already tried throwing money at this problem, and the result wasn't what you'd expect. Let's actually stress test the "it's about the money" explanation. In 2024, Google acquired a company called Character.AI specifically to bring Chazir back. The price tag? Approximately $2.7 billion, according to Let's Data Science. That's one of the highest amounts ever paid, on record, to retain a single researcher. $2.7 billion. Not an annual salary. A one-time figure. If money were the only variable, the story should end there. Chazir came back. Problem solved. But less than 2 years later, he left Google and joined OpenAI. If money were truly the whole story, that outcome shouldn't be possible. $2.7 billion is essentially the ceiling. No one is going to top that offer. So what's actually going on? Here's a detail that matters. Chazir's role at Google was co-lead of Gemini, the AI product Google has in the market competing with ChatGPT right now. His role at OpenAI, based on publicly available information, is head of AI architecture research, figuring out how to build the next generation of AI from the ground up. These are fundamentally different jobs. One is running an existing product and making it perform better in a competitive market. The other is starting from a blank page and defining the foundational architecture that doesn't exist yet, the blueprint nobody has drawn. For the person who wrote the Transformer paper, those two things are not even in the same universe of appeal. The money brought the person back. It couldn't bring back the work he actually wanted to do. And the structure of Google simply doesn't have room for that work. Why not? That requires looking at an external shift Google would never voluntarily admit is the real problem. In 2017, AI research was an academic field that happened to be funded by tech companies. The currency was peer-reviewed papers. Status came from publishing the best research at the best conferences. By that measure, Google was in a category of its own, the gold standard for serious AI work. Then ChatGPT launched in 2022. And in that moment, the entire industry's scorecard changed. The question stopped being who published the best paper and became whose product has the most users? That shift hit large established companies and lean startups very differently. In the paper publishing era, Google's infrastructure was a researcher's dream. You had compute, you had data, you had the smartest colleagues in the world, and your work could shape the entire field. Staying at Google made complete sense. In the product era, that same infrastructure started feeling like friction. Here's something most people overlook about Google: its core business is advertising. More than half of Google's annual revenue comes from search ads. Which means that inside Google, every proposed AI feature has to answer an uncomfortable question before it can move forward. Could this hurt search revenue? To make that concrete, if Google's AI gets good enough that users get answers directly in a chat interface, they stop clicking on the search results sitting next to the ads. You ask AI, what's the best Italian restaurant near me? It tells you, and you never scroll past the sponsored listings. Who makes up for those lost ad dollars? That's not a hypothetical. That's an existential threat to Google's core business model. This isn't about Google's leadership being short-sighted or malicious. This is what happens to every large, successful company. You have a business model that works. You have shareholders who depend on it. When something new comes along that threatens it, the organization develops antibodies, not through conspiracy, but through 1,000 small decisions made by people trying to protect what's already working. For Google, the thing that threatens the business model is AI itself. Which means that every genuinely radical AI idea inside Google runs into an invisible guardrail: don't touch search. Meanwhile, the competitive landscape has changed structurally. OpenAI's valuation has reached $852 billion. Anthropic's latest valuation is approaching $965 billion, according to MLQ. These companies had a fraction of Google's resources in 2019. Today they can compete on compensation and compute in ways that simply weren't possible before. But more importantly, they can offer something Google structurally cannot: your judgment directly shapes the product. No legacy ad business to protect. No inherited architecture to maintain. What you build ships tomorrow. For the caliber of researcher we're talking about, that's the thing money can't replicate. The window opened. So what did Google actually do about it? Here's the argument of this entire piece, stated plainly. Google has made a deliberate strategic choice to concede the talent war and fight a different battle instead. Whether that's the right call will be determined in the next 2 to 3 years. Let's look at how Google has responded, across 2 levels. Level 1, talent. Google acknowledged it was losing, and bought time with money. The strategy is called acqui-hiring, acquiring a company not primarily for the business, but to bring a specific founder or team back into the fold. The $2.7 billion Character.AI deal to get Shazir back is the clearest example. But here's what acqui-hiring actually is at its core: it's not a solution. It's a delay tactic. It only works if the person, after taking the money, is willing to do what you need them to do. Shazir's departure proves the assumption doesn't hold. The money delayed his leaving. It didn't eliminate his reason for leaving. Google spent $2.7 billion buying a countdown clock, not a commitment. The talent war for frontier AI researchers, the people who invent the next paradigm, not the people who scale the current one. Google has effectively conceded that war at a strategic level. It cannot give these people what they actually want: the freedom to define what comes next, without a $200 billion advertising business casting a shadow over every decision. So if that fight is unwinnable, Google is betting everything on a different fight, one it believes it can win. Level 2, infrastructure. This is where Google is actually placing its chips. Google's underlying logic goes like this: yes, brilliant researchers matter. But AI competition, as it matures, isn't determined solely by who has the smartest people. It's also determined by something more foundational: compute. Think of compute as factory capacity in the physical world. No matter how skilled your engineers are, if you don't have enough factories, you can't produce enough product. And building factories doesn't require genius. It requires capital and time, which happen to be the two things Google has in virtually unlimited supply. The numbers reflect this bet clearly. According to Sundar Pichai's public statements at Google I/O 2026, the company's projected capital expenditure this year is $180 to $190 billion, up from $31 billion in 2022. That's a six-fold increase in 4 years. The money is flowing into three areas: Google's custom TPU chips, purpose-built AI processors that reduce dependence on NVIDIA, global data center expansion, and the compute backbone that runs and trains Gemini. The strategic logic is explicit: if compute becomes the defining competitive mode in AI, then building an infrastructure advantage that no competitor can replicate, regardless of how many researchers they hire, is the most durable position in the market. Researchers can quit. You can't move a $190 billion data center footprint. Google is also pushing back on the product front. At I/O 2026, the company announced Gemini 3.5 Flash, which, according to Google's own published benchmarks, runs 4 times faster than competing frontier models at 1/3 to 1/2 the cost. They're also launching AI agent systems, not AI that answers your questions, but AI that completes tasks on your behalf, end to end. If those numbers hold up in the real world, Google's play isn't to stay ahead in AI research. It's to build such an overwhelming advantage in speed, cost, and infrastructure that it becomes the default platform in a market where AI is already commoditizing. But the entire bet rests on one assumption that Google cannot fully control: that the loss of frontier research talent won't materially slow down product iteration. In other words, Google is wagering that AI has entered an engineering phase. The hardest conceptual work, the transformer, the foundational blueprint, is done. What comes next is execution: better factories, stronger compute, lower costs, faster shipping. If that's right, it doesn't matter that the most original thinkers left, because the next decade of AI is an industrial problem, not an intellectual one. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if the next breakthrough in AI requires another entirely new blueprint, another transformer-level insight that nobody has thought of yet? And what if the people capable of drawing that blueprint are no longer at Google? That's the core risk in this bet. Google's current strategy is the optimal move within a known game. It's playing a very disciplined, very well-funded game of chess on a board it can see. But every major technological disruption in history was triggered by someone flipping the board, someone who changed the rules of the game entirely, rather than playing the existing game better than anyone else. Google is betting the board doesn't get flipped. That the next few years are about scale, not invention. That answer will arrive in the next 2 to 3 years. If the strategy doesn't hold, what does the damage actually look like? Users: no immediate crisis. Google Cloud's backlog of contracted revenue has crossed $460 billion, nearly doubling year over year. Enterprise clients don't switch infrastructure providers because 2 researchers resigned; those relationships have years of lock-in built in. The damage is real, but it's slow-moving. You won't see it tomorrow. Organizational depth: Google DeepMind employs close to 195,000 people. 2 departures don't hollow out a research organization overnight. In the near term, Google's engineering capacity and product velocity won't hit a visible wall. Financials: Q1 2026 revenue grew 22% year over year. Google Cloud revenue was up 63%. The top-line numbers still look strong. But the same earnings report showed free cash flow down 47% year over year. Free cash flow is roughly money the company can actually do what it wants with, and that number is compressing. Google is spending aggressively while its financial flexibility shrinks. If Gemini's market performance keeps lagging, the margin for error gets smaller. Reputation among talent: this is the hardest dimension to quantify and probably the most consequential over time. Analyst Gil Luria has publicly stated that Google is losing the battle for frontier AI talent. Once that narrative takes hold in the market, it starts shaping where the next generation of top researchers chooses to go, because the first question brilliant people ask when evaluating an employer is this where other brilliant people want to be? Losing talent accelerates losing talent. It's a self-reinforcing cycle, and it compounds quietly until it doesn't. Bottom line, this isn't an existential crisis. Google's business is large enough to absorb the turbulence. But it's not noise either. It's the moment a structural problem becomes legible, visible to everyone who's paying attention. If the pattern continues, the cost accumulates slowly over years, not dramatically overnight. The next time you read about a major company paying an eye-watering sum to retain or recruit a top executive, ask yourself one question before you decide what the story means. Are they buying this person, or are they buying this person not going to a competitor? If it's the latter, the money was never about loyalty. It was about buying time. And once the clock runs out, the person leaves anyway, because the thing they actually wanted to do was never available inside that company to begin with. Google spent $2.7 billion on a delay. Not a solution. That distinction between buying someone and buying the conditions that make someone want to stay applies to every talent story you'll read from here on. The money is never really the story. The work is.